The final item of business today is a members' business debate on motion number 5602 in the name of Murdo-Fraser on endangered species and wildland conservation. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put. I would ask members who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons as soon as possible, and I will call on Mr Fraser to open the debate. Mr Fraser, 7 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I thank at the outset all those members from different parties who signed my motion and allowed me to secure this members' debate. This is a debate on the broad topic of conservation, referring to the Year of Natural Scotland 2013, which we are in. It is very much a composite motion covering different topics, so there is something for everyone. So members who wish to contribute, I'm sure, can find an issue they want to address, and others they might wish to avoid. Now, in the Year of Natural Scotland, there is no better time to evaluate our current strategies to conserve both wildland and endangered species. I'd like to start off talking about two species in particular which are under threat, the first of which is the Scottish wildcat. For 9,000 years, the wildcat has lived and thrived in Scotland. Yet, despite the efforts of hard-working conservation charities like the Scottish Wildcat Association, Cats Protection and the Highland Tiger Group, the purebred cat faces imminent extinction. The SWA have released figures suggesting there are only some 35 purebred cats left living in the wild. I know my motion refers to 150 pairs, but in fact the true situation could be much worse than that. The Cairngorm Wildcat Project trialled measures aimed at encouraging the growth of wildcats in the Cairngorms. Its recommendations included raising greater awareness, encouraging responsible domestic cat ownership, fostering partnerships with estates and conducting thorough research and monitoring. I believe that an extensive captive breeding programme should be added to this list. But in the immediate future, these actions may not be enough. Desperate times often call for desperate measures. I recently asked whether the Scottish Government would consider cloning as a means to saving the wildcat, and although this did not immediately get a positive response from the Minister, I believe that the storage of frozen gametes should be taken as a necessary precaution, because only a multifaceted approach will save the wildcat, and we don't want the species to die out without a means of recreating it. Another species under threat is the red squirrel. It is the pin-up species of natural Scotland, but thanks to the spread of the grey squirrel, its numbers are under threat. I have on previous occasions in members' debates, Deputy Presiding Officer, raised the plight of the red squirrel, and I have been pleased with the positive action that has been taken by the Scottish Government on this particular issue. There is more than sentimentality at stake when protecting this iconic Scottish species. Of course.
Claudia Beamish.
Intervention, and just wanted to highlight for the Chamber tonight the importance of the point that the member makes about species protection in relation to it needing to be multifaceted. And I wanted to highlight the issue in relation to red squirrels about the in my view, the fact that it is essential that there should now be a vaccine, and that should be adequately funded. And I wonder if the member wanted to comment on that.
I think the member makes a very good point. There's a whole range of measures which can be taken, and certainly looking at vaccines could be an important one, although there is the very difficult question of how you actually administer them to the squirrels in question. But I dare say we could find some volunteers if that was required. The point I was going to make about ancient woodlands is that grey squirrels cause irreparable damage to both conifers and broadleaf trees. They strip the outer bark, with the result that vital nutrients are unable to travel up the trees, and consequently often they will die. And grey squirrels are also thought to be the carriers of diseases, including one that kills Japanese larches. They certainly carry the squirrelpox virus, which is not lethal to grey squirrels but is lethal to reds, with whom they come into contact. And we have this phenomenon in many parts of Scotland where the red squirrel population is dying out as a result of their contact with the grey squirrels carrying squirrelpox. And we also know grey squirrels will kill woodland birds and damage arable crops, telephone wires and electricity cables. Invasive non-native species are costing the British economy £1.7 billion a year, and it is estimated that the grey squirrel alone costs the British economy £14 million per year. In the part of Scotland I represent, in Perthshire, I believe there is a front line between red and grey squirrels, and strong measures are needed to stop the grey squirrels encroaching on the red's territory. What is clear is that in the last 10 years, we have seen grey squirrels moving further and further north, and we're seeing battleground areas, places like Perthshire, indeed similar situations in Aberdeenshire and in the borders, where you get red and grey squirrels in the same area, and with a consequence, over time, the reds are being driven out and into more and more remote areas. I'd just like to pay tribute to the Perth and Kinross Red Squirrel Group, who I met recently, who are working incredibly hard to raise awareness of the threat. But of course, the efforts of voluntary organisations, whilst important, can only go so far. And I'd like to hear from the Minister tonight about what more the Scottish Government can do to support the conservation efforts of foresters, landowners and conservation charities, including the European Squirrel Initiative. Habitat protection, trapping and the creation of specific exclusion zones for grey squirrels should be stepped up. Now, it's not just animal species that are being threatened, Presiding Officer. Wild land is disappearing, and disappearing fast. According to Scottish National Heritage, between 2002 and 2009, the amount of land free from visual interference or built development in Scotland declined from 41 to 28%. If we had up-to-date statistics, I'm sure the situation would have deteriorated further. These are worrying statistics, and action must be taken to reverse the trend. In a recent BBC article based on forthcoming research from Macron, our landscape was chosen as the most important aspect of our culture, ahead of both music and the arts. A 2008 SNH study found that 91% of Scottish residents felt that wild places were important. And a recent public perception survey of wilderness in Scotland found that 60% of respondents believed that wild areas were under threat. Now, there is a substantial financial case to be made for protecting wild land. Nature-based tourism contributes £1.4 billion to the economy, and tourist spending on nature-based activities is worth 40% of all tourist spending. And a simple click on the Visit Scotland website shows headlines highlighting Scotland's scenery. So what can be done to save wild places in Scotland? The John Muir Trust is calling for a specific wild land designation. This is an approach that certainly should be looked at, but I do think we should need to have some caution in implementing such a strategy. After all, what is wild land? Wild land is often a managed asset. When we look at the rolling heather-clad hills that we have in Scotland, that is actually a carefully managed landscape. It supports jobs in the form of stalking and grouse shooting. So any designation must ensure the sustainability of this important rural industry. One area where the Scottish Government could practice greater responsibility is in its approach to planning. Pylons, phone masts, wind turbines and bulldozed hill tracks are an all too often sight on what people would see as wild land. Now, I don't want in this debate to go into the detail of concerns over the cost, viability and effectiveness of wind turbines. But what is clear is that if we are to have renewable energy projects, we have to be very careful where we site them. Scotland is home to 10% of the world's blanket bog resource. Peat bogs are a natural carbon sink, helping absorb harmful carbon gases. Due to its national and international significance, surely peat bogs should be exempt from turbine development. SNH have estimated that 39,000 jobs are reliant on nature-based tourism. There's an awful lot more than the 11,000 estimated to be employed in renewable energy. Presiding Officer, I think we should be concerned about further losses to wild land because of the impact of those living and working in the Highlands, particularly in tourism. Can I just conclude by saying that in the year of Natural Scotland 2013, saving endangered beautiful wild land and endangered species should be a priority. And I would urge the Scottish Government not only to get behind wildlife charities, but also to put in place measures to save wild land before it's too late. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Now call on Mike Mackenzie to be followed by Claire Baker. 4 minutes or thereby, please.
Presiding Officer, I'm particularly pleased to speak in this debate because I've spent all of my adult life and much of my childhood living and working close to some of Scotland's wildest places. And I use the word wild in the ordinary sense of the word. But I find in reading some of the briefings sent to me that this word is not adequate. A stronger word is needed, at least for me, because what I mean by wild is the wildness that you experience going through, for instance, the Corrie Vrecken whirlpool in a small fishing boat in a gale. or walking over the mountains of Mull in a snowstorm in winter, not for fun, but for necessity, sometimes for grim necessity. And I'm led to believe that the current definition of wildness is an area where an individual finds the experience of wildness is particularly strong. From my perspective, I sometimes find that applies to Edinburgh. According to this definition, there is not much of Scotland that I and the people who work in the land in the remote rural areas would describe as wild. I should say at this point, Presiding Officer, that I have a love of our natural environment and all of its inhabitants, and I'm fortunate to be able to enjoy this right on my doorstep. Dolphins often play around the ferry boat that serves my island home. I can climb into my kayak and in less than an hour watch sea eagles on Mull or golden eagles on the Gavlos. And I've scratched the backs of basking sharks on lazy summer seas and rowed madly away from killer whales when their distinctive dorsal fin has appeared too close for comfort. And I've come face to face with wild Mull goats, and I've looked into their eyes and I've understood why the devil is sometimes personified as a big billy goat with horns and beard. And I'm really not being funny here. And I've watched otters play and I've nursed young seals back to health. But my chief concern, Presiding Officer, is our own species, Homo sapiens, for that is the threatened species throughout much of the Highlands and Islands. Mankind has inhabited Scotland for around 10,000 years, perhaps more, and in that time we've disposed of the Caledonian forest that once covered our country. In Argyll we did it to make cannonballs for Nelson's navy. Almost all of our land has been grazed or burned, and the landscape bears no resemblance to what it was even a few hundred years ago. A handful of people make a meagre living from it. It supports fewer people every year. Rural economies, traditional rural economies, are declining. Many people cling to their livelihoods like limpets on wave-washed rocks. Rural economies are changing, as they must to survive. New opportunities are opening up, and this almost always involves some new development. Many of our most economically and socially fragile areas are already suffering death by designation. Living and life itself is sometimes banned in these areas. And yet these people who live in our land, as opposed to those who go there only to play, have been the custodians of this land for generations. They have a deep-rooted understanding of the land and how to nurture it. This landscape quality takes work and active management. Under the care of people who understand this, our landscapes have been maintained in this almost pristine condition. A pristine condition that leads others to conclude that it is wild. Successful conservation is a bottom-up and not a top-down process, and it cannot and should not be imposed by designation.
Many thanks. Now call on Claire Baker to be followed by Joan McAlpine. Around 4 minutes, please.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. First, can I congratulate Murdo-Fraser on securing this evening's debate. And as the motion recognises 2013 as the Year of Natural Scotland, and that gives us an opportunity to focus on biodiversity and promote our heritage, wildlife and landscapes. I hope this is about more than just pinning a Natural Scotland label on events that are already in the pipeline. We need to see much more debate and discussion about our environment, and a tangible legacy of the year would be a robust biodiversity plan with clear actions to deliver on our targets. And focusing on endangered species, the motion highlights the red squirrel. And last summer I went to a red squirrel fun day in Tentsmuir Forest in North East Fife to find out about the work of the Fife Red Squirrel Group. Fife is not a target protection area, but the peninsula at Tentsmuir does provide an opportunity for local activists to try and grow a population there. And I'd like to commend the work of the Fife Red Squirrel Group and groups like it across the country that work tirelessly in raising awareness and introducing programmes to protect endangered species. But as Murdo-Fraser said, they do need the support in order to do this successfully. Not for the first time in the Chamber, I'll highlight the work of Scottish Environment Link and the Species Champions programme they have, which is certainly capturing the imagination of MSPs. And although a bit of fun, it is proving an effective way of engaging the Parliament in the challenges faced by many endangered species. I am, of course, grateful to Dave Thompson, who I don't think is here this evening, for having adopted the sand eels, as my puffins need the sand eels as part of their a valuable food source, and it helps grow their habitat. And habitat protection is vital to securing the future forest species, and the Minister will be aware that there are concerns that the marine protected areas don't include seabirds. And the motion also talks about habitat conservation, and this is just as important offshore as it is onshore, and the Minister knows there is and the Minister knows there is growing concern over a delayed marine plan.
Minister Paul Wheelhouse.
Thank you. I'm grateful to Claire Baker for giving way. Just in relation to, I understand the concern about the migratory species such as seabirds, but just to put on record again that we are proposing to protect sand eel population through the MPA network.
Claire Baker.
I am aware of other measures that the Government has taken, but he will be aware that there are still concerns about the lack of seabirds in the marine protected areas, which I think would just give that extra layer of protection. To show that I'm not someone who will back away from trickier issues, the motion does also talk about wildlands designation, and I understand the Public Petitions Committee will be taking evidence on the John Muir Trust petition in the near future. I do recognise the concerns of John Muir Trust and other organisations such as the Ramblers Scotland over wildlands in Scotland. An effective protection of wilderness areas is important, and as Murdo-Fraser highlighted, this is something that is valued by the public. The Parliament has introduced protective measures over the years, and in 2000 the Parliament established the National Park Scotland Act, resulting in the establishment of Loch Lomond and the Trossachs National Park in 2002 and Cairngorms National Park in 2003. In response to the Public Petitions Committee, the Minister has outlined the existing means of protection, including sites of special scientific interest, national parks, national nature reserves and national scientific areas. And NSAs are defined as an area of outstanding scenic value in a national context, and currently there are 40 areas covering 13% of the land area of Scotland, and ensuring that areas such as Glencoe, Ben Nevis, the Hebrides and some landscapes in Perthshire and the borders are protected from inappropriate development. So there is currently a system of protection, and there is already a system of constraints which are placed on developers. It's not easy to achieve the right balance of competing demands, but it is essential. And the John Muir Trust do have a very clear position on limiting renewable development and raising concerns about the impact this has on our landscapes and on the environment. However, and I think Murdo-Fraser started to explore some of this, designating wildlands would also present other challenges, and it's a fairly subjective decision, and it does run the risk of creating an imbalance in another direction. So the key debate needs to be over what is the value of what is being protected rather than what is being prevented. The Government has said it is satisfied that existing legislation and administrative systems for land use planning and environmental management provide appropriate means for meeting the obligations and objectives set out in the EU Landscape Convention. But we know there are areas, such as hill tracts, where we need to see progress, making the protections we already have work better. I'm sure there will be an interesting debate at committee, and I look forward to hearing the Minister's response in closing the debate.
Many thanks. I now call on Joan McAlpine to be followed by Liz Smith.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. Can I too congratulate Murdo-Fraser on securing this important and timely debate in the Year of Natural Scotland. And I thought it would be useful to use the motion to talk about what has been done positively to help endangered species. Claire Baker mentioned the Scottish Environment Link Species Champion scheme, and I know that many members have joined it. It's a great way to highlight the plight of 93 species that are currently facing significant threats to their future. Many of you have now adopted a creature, and the Chamber is full of strange species. I have no doubt that many members hope that the qualities of their chosen animal might reflect on them, and perhaps that's why Rhoda Grant has chosen the golden eagle, Aileen MacLeod is the industrious red squirrel, and Mary Scanlon is the exquisite freshwater pearl. But I can't understand why Murdo-Fraser omitted to mention that he's a champion of the natterer's bat, as well as the wild cat.
Murdo-Fraser.
I'm also the champion of the juniper. That might be something to do with the fact that it's a key ingredient in a popular drink.
Joan McAlpine.
Thank you very much. Yes, that was a good one to choose as well. I have not. I have more of a challenge on my hands in that I am championing the adder. And I was a little bit alarmed when Scotland told me they thought I would be perfect champion of the only venomous snake in Britain, and indeed the only snake at all in Scotland. Apparently the reptile was unloved amongst parliamentarians. It couldn't find a champion because for some reason politicians didn't want to be associated with a poisonous snake. So I felt I had the duty to take up the cudgels on its behalf, and I must say that I have no regrets. Like so much of our wildlife, the adder has huge cultural significance, and it features in our language, our literature and our art. It's originally known as the northern viper, which comes from the Latin words vivus, meaning alive, and perere, meaning giving birth, because of its live-bearing habit. It's very unusual in that it's a reptile which doesn't lay eggs. Shakespeare made several references to the adder. In Sonnet 112, he said, in so profound abysm I throw all care of others' voices, that my adder sends to critic and to flatter stopped are. The adder sense he's referring to means turning a deaf ear. There was a belief that adders could stop their ears to the unpleasantness and screen out sounds that didn't please them, which is quite a handy attribute to politicians as well. Unfortunately, it is a myth because adders do not have ears. A lot of our fear and suspicion of adders is based on our misunderstanding of them. No one has died from an adder bite in Britain for over 20 years, and with proper treatment, the worst effects are nausea and drowsiness, followed by some swelling and unpleasant bruising. But the best advice is to leave adders alone. They only tend to attack in extremis when they're frightened. Adders are relatively common in areas of rough, open countryside, and this is actually the best time of year to see them when they get ready to mate. And there's a phenomenon called the dance of the adders, where males rise up and writhe and compete against one another for female attention. The south of Scotland is an important area for the adder, and it's the area I represent. And currently the population status of the adder in Scotland is unknown, but anecdotal evidence suggests it's in decline because of habitat loss, fragmentation, unsympathetic land management and increased public access, which put it under pressure. One of the important ways to manage land to favour adders in Scotland is to do with the way we manage forestry, because once you have dense canopy of trees with very, very close planting, the snake doesn't have the sunlight it needs to thrive. It's much better on the edge of woodlands where there are young trees, so new planting is very, very important. Adders favour habitat diversity, and their presence usually indicates a healthy ecosystem. They provide food for predatory birds and mammals, and they also prey on mammals and reptiles themselves. Scotland has no baseline data which indicates the size and distribution of the adder's population, and perhaps that's because of its unpopularity. And this represents a significant barrier to the conservation of the species. So a project to assess these levels of adders, where they are and how populous they are, is very, very important. And I would hope that we would have plans to do some counting, as has already taken place in parts of England and Wales in the future. Thank you very much.
Many thanks. I now call on Liz Smith, after which we'll move to the Minister for the closing speech.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Well, Murdo-Fraser said in his introduction that this was a very wide subject, and so it has turned out to be in the offerings we've had so far, but all the better for that, because I think it is a very interesting topic that has so many different dimensions to it. And can I congratulate my colleague Murdo-Fraser on bringing this very important debate, most especially in the year of Natural Scotland. And, Deputy Presiding Officer, could I also declare an interest, because I am a member of the John Muir Trust. As a national body, I think it is to be widely commended for all the work that it has been doing over many months to ensure that we are debating the facts rather than some myths. Now, I'm often told by my climbing friends from south of the border that Scotland is the most privileged nation thanks to the extraordinary beauty of our landscapes, and particularly those which are in the most remote areas of the country. And I think Mike Mackenzie made a very important point about what wildness actually means. For these people, I think the landscapes are a very powerful magnet which attracts so many people from all over the world, in all seasons, in all weathers and in all kinds of outdoor adventures. The argument for protection of this wild land, or at least some of it, is, I believe, compelling, just as has been the case in places like Northumberland's National Park, North East England's Heritage Coast or the North Pennines. But I do think, however, there are some caveats that have to be put in place, and I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. As Tories, we are obviously not giving to supporting additional legislation too easily, but we do remain very conscious of the tensions between the wilderness and economic development, specifically the creation of employment, which has been brought into the starkest focus by the march of wind farm development across our very precious landscapes. 2 summers ago, when, along with some others, Murdo-Fraser and I were climbing in the Fisherfield area, along with, I think, millions of midges, we had to accept that even in perhaps what is seen as one of our most treasured wilderness areas, even from there we could see very large-scale wind farm developments on the skyline. And I think it brought home to us just how significant that development is and how difficult it is for some people to accept. And obviously it's an issue that has been very widely debated in many forums in this Parliament already. But apart from the overwhelming need to protect the ever more fragile ecosystem, there are also growing social and health reasons, I think, for doing so, as is evidenced by some of the studies from other countries that have been sent out in the briefings that we have had. And could I add just on this point how important I think the role of groups like the John Muir Trust have been in educating our young people about the responsibilities that they have when it comes to the protection of wild places. I remember very vividly on my first school project with the John Muir Trust the slightly indifferent reactions of pupils when they heard that we would be helping to do a major beach clear at Achmore on the south side of Lough Carron. I think, perhaps not surprisingly, they thought that they were there for a litter pick-up just because their teachers fancied a little bit of time off. Well, nothing could have been further from the truth. And on that day, I think the John Muir Trust made a huge impact on the lives of 14 teenagers, none of whom had probably been in that kind of environment before and known nothing about the responsibilities that come with it. And I note from what the John Muir Trust has been saying that in 2002 only 35 schools were involved in the John Muir Award. That's now gone up to 259, and it means that pupils who are in receipt of the John Muir Award has risen tenfold in that time period. So I think they deserve a lot of congratulations for that. And of course, that's very much in line with the basic principles for the curriculum for excellence. Obviously, we've had briefings from the Ramblers Association too. They make very good points that there has to be a much more coherent approach, including other measures relating to the planning process and the design, obviously, of the financial incentives. And they are absolutely right to point that out, that there is a balance to be had when it comes to the economy and the protection of wild land. And I think particularly evidenced by their writings and their campaigning on the basis of what's happening around the Cairngorm National Park just now. Now, I think we have to be very careful that all voices are heard. That's a point that my colleague Jamie McGrigor wanted to make, had he's unfortunately unwell today. Just to say that any new wild land protection should not be considered on a blanket basis, lest we don't pay due attention to the needs of the traditional land uses, such as farming and angling, crofting, game shooting, deer stalking, etc., because they are all hugely important. There has to be these voices in that. It has to be a managed process, because these people are just as important as the rest of us who like to enjoy the wilderness. So in conclusion, Deputy Presiding Officer, most land is managed to a certain extent, but I think it's very important that we take a very structured view of this and try to consider all avenues in this, because at the end of the day we do have the most significant landscapes in the world. Thank you.
Many thanks. Now call on Minister Paul Wheelhouse to close the debate on behalf of the Government. 7 minutes or thereby, please, Minister.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And there have indeed been many interesting contributions. I thank Murdo-Fraser for bringing this subject to the Chamber today. There's been especially mention of wild things, wild cats to wild land. We've had mentions of bats, adders, juniper or gin, perhaps, in the case of Murdo-Fraser, puffins and sand eels. So I've really enjoyed listening to the speeches that have been made. It's a challenge to try and cover all of it, so I'll do as best I can in my response. Much has been said today about the John Muir Trust campaign and petition for a new environmental designation for wildland, and public support for recognising the value of areas of relative wildness. And I'm pleased to have the opportunity to respond to that. It allows me to make it quite clear the issues raised are important, and the Scottish Government believes in the protection of those sensitive areas of Scotland valued for their beauty or wildland character. The nub of the matter, though, and I think Claire Baker and indeed others have referred to it, is that how do we best achieve this? We realise all too well there is a balance to be struck between gaining the optimum climate and the economic benefits from Scotland's renewable energy resource, which Mike Mackenzie referred to, and protecting our landscapes. We already have a mechanism for protecting areas of wildland character, the Scottish planning policy. We also already have statutory designations with a landscape focus, such as the national scenic areas and national parks, which Claire Baker referred to. The importance of wildland is already recognised in planning policy. This states, and I quote, "The most sensitive landscapes may have little or no capacity to accept new development. Areas of wildland character in some of Scotland's remoter upland, mountain and coastal areas are very sensitive to any form of development or intrusive human activity, and planning authorities should safeguard the character of these areas in the development plan." And the Scottish planning policy also requires local authorities in their development plans to set out a spatial framework for onshore wind farms of over 20 megawatts. I will.
Murdo-Fraser.
I'm very grateful to the Minister for giving way for his explanation. The figures I quoted earlier about the decline in wild land that there has been in Scotland over the last decade or so, are they not indicative to the Minister, though, that perhaps these planning policies he's talking about need to be revisited?
Well, I certainly recognise that this issue is gaining sort of greater significance now as we do face more development pressure, but we will be consulting soon on a new draft Scottish planning policy and the third National Planning Framework Main Issues Report. And I think this will allow us to hear the full range of views on how areas of wildland character and relative wildness throughout Scotland should be protected within the planning system going forward from here. Some 20% of the land of Scotland already has a statutory protection. I think Claire Baker was referring to some of the other figures about the 40 national scenic areas that are already established. They are often overlooked in this debate, but they were designated precisely because of their outstanding scenic value in a national context. And there are, of course, the two national parks, which again Claire Baker referred to, which were designated with all party support as iconic landscapes and because of their outstanding natural heritage, distinctive character and identity. There is a lot of overlap between these already designated areas and certain areas of wildland character, and some half of the broad brush wildland search areas identified by SNH in 2002 are already protected by being in an NSA or a national park. And there are no commercial wind farms in our national parks and NSAs, and the planning system provides the necessary protection to ensure wind farm developments do not impact adversely upon them. I think, given time is pressing, I would like to say a little bit about SNH's work in mapping wildland, which first started in 2002, because it is relevant to the debate. Capturing a subjective quality like wildness, again, which Mike Mackenzie touched upon, which can be found in many places, including in urban areas, is challenging. And measuring wildness is inherently difficult, as people respond differently to the qualities of wildness according to their experience and their expectations. However, it is possible to capture and map basic characteristics, such as ruggedness, slope and elevation, that contribute to certain types of wildness. And SNH has used modern mapping tools to improve upon the broad brush search area for wildland of 2002. And in 2012, they consulted on a map of relative wildness covering all of Scotland. And this will be of great help in the forthcoming review of Scottish planning policy. As members will be aware, not all applications for onshore wind farms are consented. Indeed, in 2012-13, only 21% of those multiple turbine projects that were referred to reporters were actually approved or allowed. So it's not true to say, as some have in the discourse, that all wind farms immediately gain approval as soon as they go to reporters. Far from it. So some proposals, of course, don't even make it past the scoping stage due to a range of factors and planning constraints, or they're withdrawn before the application, or indeed are refused at a local level. And reporters do give very careful consideration to issues of landscape. But I'd like to move on, because of pressing time. There's a number of points about species I'd like to pick up on. In terms of the Scottish wildcat, and I recognise Murdo-Fraser's genuine interest in this. We've had a number of parliamentary questions that he has raised and I've responded to. Media reports last year did highlight there may now only be 150 breeding pairs of Scottish wildcats left in Scotland. Certainly hear the figure that Murdo-Fraser mentioned with some interest. While I agree that the indications are that wildcats are rare and under considerable threat, we need to be careful about drawing conclusions from estimates of population size and different types of information, because hybridisation with domestic and feral cats, which I think Murdo-Fraser did refer to, poses the greatest threat to the Scottish wildcat, as well as the close proximity to feral and pet animals, which exposes the species to novel diseases such as feline influenza. Loss and fragmentation of habitat, something that was picked up in relation to adders that Joan McAlpine mentioned, is another issue that we are concerned about. But just to reassure Murdo-Fraser, in one respect, the Scottish Wildcat Action Group are apparently already storing frozen gametes, and therefore that does offer the potential to do the work he indicated. And SNH and their partner organisations addressed issues such as I've posed in terms of the challenges facing wildcats directly in the north east of Scotland through the Cairngorm Wildcat Project. And the findings of the Cairngorm Wildcat Project were published in August 2012, and the final report is available on the National Parks website. Just in my final, have I just checked with the presiding officer, we've got a final minute.
Or two, if you wish.
Oh, thank you. That's very helpful. Work is being taken forward through the Scottish Wildcat Conservation Action Group to look at other possibilities, including innovative approaches such as captive breeding and translocation of cats in the wild. However, the current emphasis is to obtain more up-to-date information on numbers and distribution, which in turn will help to prioritise action on the ground. As regards red squirrels, I certainly identify with what Murdo-Fraser is saying. I think it's an iconic species. It's a very important part of our ecosystem, and indeed it faces even more challenges now that ash trees are threatened, which is one of the main trees which is resistant to grey squirrels, and indeed doesn't suffer the symptoms of damage to bark that you expressed in relation to, that Murdo-Fraser expressed in relation to grey squirrels. But it's clearly an issue that we're looking at in the context of our response to the Cholera Fraxinea outbreak. The aim of grey squirrel control are very different in different locations, and we need to prevent the spread into areas that currently only have red squirrels, to control in key corridors in places like Tayside and indeed Loch Lomond and the Trossachs, and indeed the borders, as you mentioned, in Aberdeenshire. And we need to try and contain the spread of squirrelpox virus in the south of Scotland as best we can. I know Claudia Beamish unfortunately isn't here now, but she has a long-standing interest in this issue as well, and to reassure her through Claire Baker perhaps that we are waiting information from Morden Institute as to what sort of costs would be involved in terms of progressing a vaccine. But just a note of caution on that a vaccine may take several years to develop, so it's not an immediate solution to the problem. We need to certainly work on the habitat fragmentation, trying to protect the pockets of red squirrels that do exist, and try and prevent the spread of grey squirrels from the areas they've already encroached upon. But I appreciate I've used up my time, presiding officer. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And that concludes this debate, and I now close this meeting of Parliament. Thank you very much.